Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting Dan, myself, and Pete to your evening. It's an honor to be here with you tonight. My name is Ubaid, spelled Ubaid, and I'm the policy strategy lead for the Met's LGBT plus network, the staff association that Dan was just mentioning. But I've been invited today to give you an insight into my life as a gay Muslim Pakistani man who lives with a hearing impairment. I wasn't sure where to begin really, but let me start from the beginning. I was born with crystal clear hearing. Most of my life, I could hear clearly and never had any problems with my hearing. I grew up in a traditional Pakistani Muslim community in the northwest of London. After school, as every other Pakistani kid in the area, we would go to the mosque to learn the Quran. And after the three of my siblings, I would practice Islam all the time, praying, fasting, and reading the Quran. I loved every aspect of my religion, and I even daydreamed after watching Bollywood movies about marrying a woman and settling down, and even pictured having children, a house, and a car. And if you fast forward to like when I was about 16, 17, I began to recognize that my infatuation with some of the boys that I studied with were actually crushes, and I was actually attracted to them sexually. I began to question my sexuality for the first time. Growing up in the Pakistani Muslim household, there was never any kind of gray area. It was always black and white. You could only be straight. You would only marry eventually at a certain age. There was only one way, and anything on the other side was forbidden. It was a taboo. So even thinking about being gay was a taboo. Acting on my sexual urges was seen as a sin, and I struggled quite a lot in those years. I lost a lot of weight. I lost confidence and really struggled to find my place in the Muslim community. And so a few years later, I met other LGBT Muslims like me, and together we formed UK's first LGBT Muslim community, an organisation that still exists today, thriving 21 years later, called Iman. And through them, thanks to them, I gained a lot of confidence in myself and eventually came out to my family. So around this time, so maybe early 20s or so, I started going clubbing. I'd never been to London before, and I was just fascinated by the scene, especially the night scene. And I always loved dancing, so put any kind of music on, and I would just start dancing. But back then, there was a fantastic, great nightclub called Wig Out. It was on a Saturday night. It was an underground. It was a club underground behind JY nightclub off Tottenham Court Road, and it was a very crowded night. And the people would just dance. There was sweat coming off people. There was sweat coming from the ceilings, but we didn't really care. We just carried on. So after one of these nights, the noise that I would get in my ears, a tinnitus kind of sounding noise in my ear. After a few nights, that sound would go and my hearing would come back. But a week or so later, I couldn't hear it properly. And after about a week and a half, 2 weeks, I eventually went to the doctors to actually find out what was going on. Why couldn't I hear anything anywhere? What was happening with my hearing? And immediately my GP took me off to an accident emergency where I had some more hearing tests done. And that afternoon, I was told that I lost most of my hearing, and I needed a hearing aid to carry on with my life. So, and the way they told me was a very matter of fact. There was no kind of support, no advice. I was just kind of left to leave the hospital and just get on with my life. I was told after 3 or 4 months I would get my hearing aids, and that was it. So I left the hospital and ended up in a real deep depression. I lost so much weight. I was withdrawn. I would never leave the house. I wouldn't see all my gay Muslim friends. I wouldn't hang out. One or two times I tried to, and it was just so hard trying to engage, to communicate. And I struggled to work. And so 3-4 months later, I was eventually given a pair of hearing aids on the NHS, and just started trying to get on with my life, but I struggled. And what was really hard was my friends were very not understanding at all. They were very so they would have conversations. If I couldn't hear them, they wouldn't help me communicate. They wouldn't help communicate with me. Some would laugh at me. My family members would just roll their eyes and just tell me. Well, family would kind of go into this whole kind of, well, maybe you caused your hearing loss. Maybe you listened to music too loud. You were using your mobile phone too often. All this kind of stuff. And looking back now, I kind of really miss some of my favorite sounds that I took for granted back then, I guess, like the rain against my window, listening to birds singing first thing in the morning when I'd wake up. And again, my religion came up. So some of my LGBT Muslim friends, as well as some people in my family, really saw that I must have committed some major sin, and God was punishing me by taking away my hearing. And that was really hard to believe. But because I was so ingrained in my religion, that I started actually believing some of that, and spent so much time asking for forgiveness, asking why me, asking what I had done, really retracing my steps. And it took some years later that a doctor said to me that I really need to let go of asking why and actually start embracing my hearing loss. And through them saying that to me, I actually took a pause and started finding confidence in that. And that really helped me move on. I stopped thinking that I had committed some sin, and instead started to embrace my hearing loss as a blessing. In Islam, we believe a lot about our lives being predestined, and that's another conversation altogether. But I started actually seeing that my hearing loss as a blessing, and actually it was going to happen in my life. I should embrace it now. And I also began to see my disability as another part of my identity. Just like my sexuality today, I also began to embrace my hearing disability. With my disability, I gained many insights. So insight into the struggles friends and family and colleagues and public would go through to access services and public services.
Ubaid, I think you've frozen.
Bear with me, I think he dropped out, but I would just reconnect.
Hello.
Yep, you're back.
Yeah. Brilliant. Do you know what part I must have stopped, or?
You were talking about getting insights into barriers that people were facing when they were accessing services.
Yeah, sure. So that's great. Thank you for that. So I think with my disability, once I started embracing it, I started gaining a lot of insights and recognizing insights that friends, family, colleagues, and just the public would go through to access services, access public spaces. I myself had many horror stories where people either discriminated against me or ignored me, or just saw right through me and didn't acknowledge that I was there because of my hearing loss. I've gone through a reasonable adjustment approach in the Met Police where I worked to obtain a pair of hearing aids, and that gave me an insight about the long and difficult process of actually trying to get a pair of hearing aids through access to work. But that gave me an insight about the struggles that my colleagues must go through, just living with a disability at work. But not just struggles, they also introduced me to a whole new community that I've come to embrace, that have given me inspiration, have given me courage and confidence. This is where through that, there's the solidarity and empathy between us, and a collective voice for change. And I've been able to connect with some people in that community, and I really want to connect further. So there's one community organisation called Parapride. It's a LGBT disabled community, and they hold social events, and to help raise funds for the community, they have performance nights, and there's performers who live with a disability, but they have all these amazing talents that allow them to perform, and that just gives me more inspiration and courage and pride. So I guess I'll end there. Whilst being disabled led me to depression, it now gives me a lot of strength and confidence and power, and I hope sharing that story with you tonight give other people strength and power. Happy to take any questions.